I'm very happy about this panel because I feel like we keep doing this panel over and over again, but you have actually some kind of nice experience around this topic, so it's going to be a good one. So maybe we can start because both of you, Yves and Julien-David, you have some past shared experience with talent. Could you tell us a bit more how you worked on talent and how it was a few years ago when you started thinking about going global from, of course, the investor's perspective and the inside story?
Okay, sure. So yes, I'm here representing Axeleo, a startup accelerator, but I'm actually working for Restlet, platform as a service vendor. And before that, as you said, I was VP of marketing for talent for almost 8 years, so almost from the inception up until 18 months ago. So I literally saw the company grow, and I played a little role in that from an open source startup, where the idea was to just change the world of data integration, to go after the big guys with a new approach, an open source approach. And so that started essentially very quickly. And from day one, talent was global. We put out an open source product. It got downloaded from all over the world without any marketing virtually on the first couple months. 40% of the downloads were coming from the US, even though we had absolutely no US presence.
So did you expect to have this kind of feedback from the US, even though you were like building a product without particularly thinking about the US?
So we were targeting the developer community, which I believe is global in nature. And even though the development team was actually partially in France and partially in China, we were not targeting specifically the French market or the Chinese market, but literally the global market. I mean, developers don't really care where software is built. They care about what it does and how it serves their needs. It doesn't really matter. Of course, marketing helps. Being well referenced by Google, doing search engine marketing certainly helps get traction. But even without those marketing tactics, if a product is good, it's going to get traction in the developer community very quickly.
Cool. And what about you, Julien-David? How did you come up with talent?
Quickly, Iris is a quite historical French fund that invests globally. We're a large fund. We invest from seed to very late stage for the past 30 years in digital economy companies. Actually, we came late on talent. We invested in the summer of 2013. The company had already raised pretty much like $70 to $80 million, 5 rounds. And we're actually joining with BPI at a moment where the company had developed a US management. It had like Balderton, Silver Lake investors, so very American. But it needed one more step to really become an international and typically American company. So when we joined, we invested because the company was in the process of establishing very software-oriented marketing after all the job you had done, also sales, moving forward with a completely American board of executive committee members. So typically, we joined at a moment where the company was already international, but turning very industrial to that process. And that was very interesting because the job of discovering the market, understanding the customer's need, establishing specific pricing and marketing was already done, typically by you, Yves. But actually, the next step was to really turn onto an international machine with processes, with down the line software to follow Salesforce, pipeline, etc. And that's where we interfered. And the truth is, since we invested, the company has really turned onto an international, let's say, global software company that you could compare to Oracle. It was already the case, but we've just seen it become something that is an establishment in open source and software. So we saw the next step to your evolution.
And is that something you're looking for? Some company that has some kind of traction internationally but needs to become like more process focused about going global and things like that? Are you looking at this turning point when you're investing?
It's a very good point to participate around indeed. It depends, of course, on the size of the company. Very young companies, we do now as investors, pretty much all investors in the room are looking for international ambitions for the company and potential, but you develop one market at a time. So you first develop your personal market. So I assume lots of you are software entrepreneurs in France. Let's not count Belgium. It's pretty close. Perhaps Wallonie.
There are a lot of Belgians in the room, so be careful.
But you start with a company that tries to aim already at a global footprint, but you're on one market. A good moment to join is a moment where you can prove that already when you position some of your product outside, there's response. And then there's lots of stages, first to go there, then to build a team, then to internationalize and process. All these steps we can participate at, but of course the most exciting is when the company starts to have traction and you come there and you build that thing. That's
all right, so let's talk about tips then. And I guess both of you can answer this question. What do you think, because you say, okay, we can help them. How do you help these companies when they think about going global? Is it like finding the right country, doing the right strategy? Same thing for you. Do you think there's a perfect way to do things? Do you think you should open a new office outside, maybe in the US? Or do you think you can do everything from France?
So on our side, we operate, just as Bernard Liotto described earlier, we operate at the board level. So we're here to help with the strategic thinking. We're here to provide the tools. We have in our portfolio, in our history, lots of companies at different stages that moved from one stage to another. So we know the good practices, we can put the right relationships in place.
Tell us about these good practices.
Good practices, number one, the first step prior to even fundraising is for the entrepreneurs to go in the market they're targeting. Right now you're starting a company, so you think that once you've done it in France, for example, it's going to be easier in other countries. The truth is you have a product and you know your product, but you have to go to other destinations to know. Sometimes you will discover that the local culture is different, so generating the first interest and traction, it's a full entrepreneur's job of going there and testing. Once you've done that, there are local contacts to have the first sales representatives or people who will intermediate and provide you the right contacts, lead generation. You will look perhaps at first for a pre-sales, a person able to customize your software tool for the local needs that might differ. You will try to establish your first marketing initiatives through, let's say, SEO, SEM, but dedicated to one specific location. Then you will build a team. You will choose locations. So there are platforms. Asia, you might think about Singapore, Hong Kong, US. You might think if you're in AdTech, New York. If you're in Pure Tech, San Francisco. But Beam is in the room. You chose Kansas City. So any city works, right? And so on. And then you look for the right people to recruit, the right people sometimes to invest, because when you've become an American company, that's the right time to have American investors also. These are the various steps and tools that you can use.
And actually, the relocating and the discovering the target market is absolutely critical. I will confirm that one of the two founders of Talent, Bertrand Diard, actually moved to the Silicon Valley barely a year after the creation of Talent, and he has been living there with his family throughout the Talent adventure. So, and that was absolutely critical to the success of Talent there. It was also critical to our ability to penetrate not only the software ecosystem, but also the investors ecosystem. I mean, I doubt we would have had the ability to raise with Silver Lake Sumero if Bertrand was actually not a neighbor to Sand Hill Road and where all the VCs reside in the US.
Yeah, and so we talked a lot about Talent, but a couple of other examples. Atomic is a company in DSP technology that was very strong in France and Europe. We had good traction from Tel Aviv inbound. But then we had to get there. Right now, the CEO is in New York building the company. We have also Mailjet, with whom we've had a first team and now larger teams developed locally. You imagine Mailjet is a very efficient software tool that allows you to send email, but there's a specific in the German market, there's a specific in the US market. You need local people there to actually deploy, get the right contacts, get the right marketing, and be a relay of your communication and product there. Shift was actually announced 2 weeks ago for a large round, but we started with AXA and a couple of other insurers in some countries, and then other insurers had some interest, or other entities of large insurers drew us to Asia, they drew us to America. So you get also attracted by your customers, you get there, and out of there you start developing larger footprint.
And yet, in many of these examples, it's all about going to the US. So do you think it's the only way, like you have to go to the US second if you are like a France-based company? Or is it more about going all over Europe first and then to the US? What do you think is the best way?
I think you have first to think global. When you build a software company, that software company has to be born global. You need to have the global market in mind. The French market is a fairly narrow market. And with that, there are actually some very interesting examples not too far from us where the domestic market is so small that companies born in those countries have to think global at first. The best example is probably Israel. The local market is virtually non-existent. So an Israeli company will think about the global market. And typically, of course, they project to the US and to England before going to the rest of the world. But build the company globally. And even if you're going to try things out on the French market, you should really establish everything, establish your practices, establish the software, the documentation, the go-to-market methodology, processes, and strategy, so that it will be easy to transpose to other markets. Now, in some domains, there will be an actual transposition that will need to be made, because you're talking about a different ecosystem. Maybe you need to recruit some local partners. Maybe you're an intermediation platform, like the restaurant platform or the food delivery or the chauffeur services, etc., where you need to recruit local service providers. Or maybe you actually don't have anything to do. I'm thinking specifically of Restlet, where I am today. We are a platform as a service targeting developers, so we're in the B2D, business to developer market. A developer in France, in the US, in Ukraine, in the Philippines is just a developer. They have this developer culture, they have those geek codes, and you can market to all those people exactly the same way.
Do you plan to open offices in the US, for example?
So we have an office in the US because our founder relocated to San Francisco to be in the heart of the ecosystem, the other software vendors and the VCs, and we hired an US CEO who was experienced in building companies and helping startups, but we have no intention at this stage to open offices in the UK, in Germany, in Asia, etc. We are viewing the market, the world as a global market, and it's not, it's circumstantial that our engineering is in France and our CEO in the US.
I think there are, again, it's rule of thumbs. Number one, you get drawn by the markets that are relevant to you. So some markets, in software, the potential reach is global from day one. You build a platform, you can be found through SEO, SEM, and suddenly you find out that you have a mix of customers that sometimes is in the US, sometimes it's somewhere else. The luxury of lean and software methodologies is that the market draws you sometimes to some places. And then there are platforms. US is a platform for bigger reach in technology. Asia has become a platform. Surprisingly, we end up sometimes discussing more and more about Asia first and then US, because you see more maturity, for example, in e-commerce adoption or some big data adoption in some countries than others. And there you choose a spot that gives you an international radiation. And also there's something very practical. It's the time delay with your teams in France and somewhere else. For example, in the US, suddenly you decide to go international. Everybody will think San Francisco. Guess what? 9 hours time difference. The moment somebody starts in San Francisco, somebody goes to sleep in Paris.
Yeah, I know that. I work with people in San Francisco.
Tell us about international, please.
Yeah, it's pretty funny about TechCrunch because we have just one writing team across all kind of time zones because we want to have someone in front of the computer 24/7. So we have people in Asia. Most of the team is in San Francisco. We have a few people in the UK, me in Paris. And it's pretty funny that now you can literally build one team thanks to the internet and the web across the world and live as a team and work as a team without having to be in the same room. And it's quite impressive. But yeah, 9 hours is a big difference because when it's 9 a.m. in San Francisco, it's already 6 p.m. in France. So when you need to schedule calls or stuff like that, of course, you have to take that into account, for example.
So sometimes some companies choose Boston or New York because it's only 6 hours. It's a good hub for the entirety of the US, but it gives you a way to interact at least on a half-a-day basis. That works. Other companies choose to be even in Australia because guess what? You're in software, and when you go larger, some of your customers will ask you for SLAs. You need to be available 24/7. So the truth is you put one guy in Australia, and guess what? You've got a 24-hour time slot. You finish in Paris, you start in Australia. It all depends on, one, the market traction, and then the practicality of what you're going to deploy for your customers.
Yeah, and obviously it's different for customer support, for example. If you want to have someone always available, you will need to have someone in the US and maybe someone in Australia. So you have to take that into account as well when it comes to going global. So maybe talking a bit about investment and VC money, is it important to open new markets when it comes to like pitching to US-based VCs, for example?
Well, I mean, practically speaking, you need to be visible in the US market in order to pitch to US VCs. I mean, you might be extremely successful in Europe, but if they don't know that you are committed to the US market, if they don't have the ability to see you on a regular basis, to have coffee together at the local Starbucks, it's going to be extremely difficult.
Blue bottle, but yeah.
Yeah, of course, there are some more trendy stuff now. It's going to be extremely difficult to go and raise money in the US without having a physical presence. And that's why, you know, Talent made the choice early on to move to the US. That's why the founder of Restlet moved to the US. So even though we still have engineering in France, the founder of Restlet moved there because that was the right way to connect with the local ecosystem. So in certain markets, you can reach your clients without being physically present in the country. It doesn't work for all markets, but in some, for example, the business to developer, but for raising funds, clearly being in the ecosystem is extremely important.
Over the past 4 or 5 years mostly, but over the past 30 years, we've had the chance to co-invest with American investors. We've invested with Andreessen, we've invested with Axel, with a lot of players, and they're just like you and us, meaning that they're very pragmatic. You have a young company coming to you, and you know it's going to grow fast, and it's looking for a market. You invest close to home. So lots of companies here think they could raise right away from the US, but the truth is what American investors ask from you at first is a local presence, most of the time to have a US company, and they ask you for a local pipe. They want you to have customers or prospects locally that they can interview, that they can see, so that they generate traction out of that. So the first step of an international investment is actually first being there. Developing a footprint, and once you're there, what you've done with Talent, what we've done with a couple of other companies, once you're there, natural interaction with local investors happen. It works well. Kiriba actually is a French company, now very US-based. The investors are American because the traction comes from there, and it's close to home. That applies to younger companies. Once you're a larger company, it's more also about capital placement and capacity to be global. BlaBlaCar is a European company that was very well invested by large American funds. On larger stage, let's say the rules get a little bit different. But on young stages, VCs want to be where you are. So you get local investors at first.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about early stage startups as well. Would you give different advice for very early startups who have 2 or 3 co-founders? Do they need to go through American accelerators, for example? What's your advice on this?
Number one, you start with a market. So the first customers will be somewhere. You need to start somewhere. It's okay to start in France. It's okay to start in Japan. This is where you start. It's the beginning. So first, you need to show that you're able to grow that base. Of course, we're looking for international ambition. That's what we need now, and that's what the technology allows you to have. But at first, you start somewhere, and it's okay. But once you've started somewhere, you're going to start somewhere else. And to start somewhere else, same story as the first time, you need to get there. You need to find out about the market specifics. So the first thing is, if you're 3 founders, guess what? One of the 3 at least will do a couple of trips there prior to seeing any investors about international move. Because you're going to get there, get the feel of the market. Luckily, you get your first prospects, and that's how it starts. Once you've done that, the next step is to raise money, to enlarge the pipe. The moment you start having a process of a couple of people to support and to sell to, well, guess what? You're going to have to move there. Because you can imagine you're going to build a team from a distance, but there's plenty of things you're going to miss. The rules of the market, choosing the right people, the way you chose them in France or wherever you are. So at some point, at least temporarily, there's no successful entrepreneur story international without the entrepreneur going there at some point and spending some time. You talked about Bertrand in Talent. There's Jean-Baptiste Rudel, who lived in the US for Criteo. We've got a couple of them also. So it always happens. Jérôme Leca in our portfolio from Scality lives there, comes back on a regular basis, and he raised money there, guess what? So you're going to have to get there at some point.
So, Romain, you asked about accelerators, topic that I know well, being a partner in Axeleo. There is no rule of thumb, and some companies will benefit more from a US accelerator, some companies will benefit more from an accelerator closer to home. The accelerator is not only about opening the US market. It's also about structuring the company so that it's ready to tackle the international expansion. And structuring that company, of course, means finding the right employees, sales managers, etc. in the US, but it's also structuring the product so that it can be sold internationally. It's structuring the support process. It's structuring the lead generation, the sales process. And that is not necessarily going to move to the US. Actually, it's probably not going to move to the US. The headquarters is still in France. The product is still engineered in France. It is supported from France. You need to fine-tune the offering, the positioning, the go-to-market. And in that case, if the core of your team, which is going to do that, is actually based in France, you're probably better off being helped by a French accelerator with a team that has experience in tackling US markets than trying to go and sign up for, I don't know, a Y Combinator or whatnot, where you will just be one among several hundreds of startups, which will be probably so different than what they are used to see that their program might not be suitable for you.
Okay, I guess you're defending your own stuff, but yeah, sure.
You're not convinced?
How about you, Romain? One question, because there are more and more French companies. And
why are you asking questions now?
Because you're part of
okay,
that panel.
Okay, cool.
There are
Go ahead,
more
go ahead.
French companies going to Y Combinator. It's recent. There's been Algolia.
Yeah, there have been quite a few, maybe a handful every batch, every 6 months. Most of them end up becoming an American company in some way, with at least part of the team in the US and part in France, and in some cases, like Front, for example, all of the team in the US. Every single time I've talked to companies that have been through Y Combinator or 500 startups or Techstars, there's even Aircode is in the room, I think, they will tell you that it was an amazing experience and that they learned a lot. Of course, you learn a lot because you have this kind of different perspective as well. You are French, coming from the outside, basically. So you take everything with a grain of salt and you see that things can be different and work as well. So I feel like you learn more than American companies going through an American accelerator. And sometimes it can be harmful. Of course, like every startup, not all startup is successful, but I don't think it depends on the accelerator you're going to go through. So it depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes you need that because you feel like you have more opportunity on the American market. Sometimes you feel like you're still small, so it's not as painful as it could be if you do that at a later stage, relocating part of the company. So I guess it depends. So that's why I was like a bit mean with you, sorry. Let's take a step back and talk about what do you think is the biggest mistake you could make as a French entrepreneur thinking about going global?
Thinking that the world revolves around France and that everybody is thinking like you, that you don't need to adapt, that you can apply exactly the same methods you've applied to be successful on the French market. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, fair.
In other words, not going there. We have examples of people coming to us saying the market is there, we just have to go there, and actually some of them raised before testing and then crashed because the market was not ready. It was not about the product, it was about the market maturity locally from the product. We have stories in our portfolio of people who hired people to represent them outside Europe, and after 6 months of non-performance, we started discussing at boards whether the market was good for us or not, and guess what? It was just not the right team fit. It was not the right person at the right time, at the right place. So guess what? The entrepreneur had to get there, rebuild, recruit, and it works. So I think the number one mistake is not testing the market. The problem is, as entrepreneurs, you don't have much time. You need to prioritize. So it's hard to say, I'm not going to try the US because I can't get there because right now I'm too busy with France and UK and Germany. But yeah, sometimes it's just the way it works. And if you manage to scale France, UK, Germany, hire a VP of sales for that region and start generating some bandwidth, then you get there. And that's also our role to help you build that. If we don't do things in the right order, there are so many reasons you can crash it that it's going to crash most of the time.
Okay, and follow-up question, do you think a co-founder has to go to the UK, Germany, or the US? Or do you think it can be like a country manager? What do you think?
That's a personal belief. I think all rules apply and every company is different. But I think that you need to be there at least some time locally to measure the market, because
So you as a co-founder, you mean?
yes, one of the why? Because you invented a product. You invented a product on one market to which you sold. You built a story around that product, and it sold. So you've got your product, you've got your story, and guess what? Suddenly you go to another country, and you start telling that story, and people, they don't understand what you say, because in that country, well, we do things differently. It doesn't mean your product is inadequate. It means that the story that you've been selling to some people who are using, I don't know, e-commerce in some way, well, it doesn't apply, because in the other country, the practices are different. So the people who invented the product, the people who own the DNA of the product, they are the only ones that are able to tweak the DNA locally to make it a local product. So you need to get there at least for some time, just to understand what you're going to change in the DNA of your product, and what's the right environment for your company to be installed and sold in that environment, and then you can come back. But again, you're the sole owner of the DNA of your company and product. If it needs to be adopted, I do not know anybody better than one of the co-founders to do it.
But then the strategy can be very different if you're talking about going far away or close by. Going to the US or to Asia, you actually need to relocate there at least for a time, or to plan to spend 2-3 weeks a month, because you just cannot fly over to San Francisco for a meeting the next day. It's just too expensive, too far. Whereas, you know, London, Berlin, it's actually a lot easier, a lot cheaper. So you can have a visible presence and spend a lot of time in country without actually relocating. Because even if you have a meeting the next day with an investor or a client, etc., chances are you can find a cheap flight at the last minute and fly there for the next day. In San Francisco, if you have to work around trips that are planned in advance, etc., it's just not happen. You're showing that you're not serious on that market.
Cool. Maybe some personal stories now. What do you think about San Francisco? Do you like San Francisco?
Except in the summer where it's foggy. But yeah, I love San Francisco. It's just too far away from France. Too many hours wasted on the plane, and
what's your best and worst memory of San Francisco?
Nick's rule. I lived in New York, so I love San Francisco. Great city, but hey, New York, come on.
Yeah, I know,
You're
right?
asking me.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's fun about San Francisco is here we're all in the tech industry, but you go out, we're in Paris. There are so many different people. When you go in San Francisco now, you're with your friends. You're in a tech environment. You're in the future. So that's quite striking. Sometimes for a French person who likes lots of different things, and also we like to not be happy about the fact that everybody's the same as you. Sometimes it's frustrating in San Francisco, but the one amazing thing about the West Coast is that this is tech. This is where it happens. This is the natural language that here we use together. They just use it globally. So to build a company, it seems nicer, it seems easier, but just beware that, of course, the competition's fiercer and the expectations of the environment, the investors, the customers are higher. It's the next league in terms of tech. But we're doing better and better here, so I think at some point we won't really see the difference.
Do you still think there's some sort of glass ceiling when it comes to going global for a French company, or do you think people have moved on and think global now much more easily?
We still see some scare. Honestly, we still have international investors saying, yeah, but what about your labor laws in France? What about this? But it's more of a reflex, because each day that we have another international fundraising, each day that we have one entrepreneur going somewhere else and building an amazing story, and right now when I read the news, I have that every day. One day we have one more argument, and you know what? They're like every one of us. They want to be part of success, and I think it's growing. So there are still prejudice, but I think we're doing a good job at proving them wrong. And talent, actually.
Well, and the other way, I mean, they need to be educated to, yes, the French labor laws are complicated, but everything just costs money. If you want to get rid of somebody, you just pay him to leave. In the US, in the Silicon Valley, you cannot retain people. You cannot build team. Everybody is so crazy expensive. So it's actually more complicated to build a tech team in the Silicon Valley today than it is in France. So it works both ways, and it can work to our advantage as well.
Cool, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Thank you.
Thank you.